Thank you very much for coming to this session. My name is Olaf Merk. I work at the International Transport Forum, and I'll be moderating this session. We are, of course, expecting people to come back from their coffees and teas, so the room will fill up gradually, but I think we have a schedule to respect. We're talking about logistics, and we will try to be in time. Well, the title of this session is Making the Links, and as I said, we will be talking about logistics, about supply chains. And what we have seen over the last couple of years since the pandemic seems to have brought the supply chain really to the center of our attention. Suddenly, they make for headline news with freight transit times that have increased, schedule reliability, predictability that has slipped, with transport costs that have gone up, and key transport nodes that have become congested. This, of course, has economic impacts. Manufacturers suffer from delays in delivery of commodities, of intermediate goods, such as car parts or electronic components. Agricultural exporters and other shippers face difficulties in securing cargo space, making it actually very hard to export their goods. And in many cases, it is the small and medium enterprises that are particularly vulnerable to the lack of sufficient access to freight transport options. So what to do about this problem of accessibility? Well, in this session, we'll try to answer that question, or provide maybe several answers to that question. As I said, the title of this session is Making the Links, and that is also what we'll try to do. We'll have a conversation on stage with our panelists, but if possible, we also want it to be interactive. So maybe if you have some time, we'll also ask you, the audience, for your questions. But I'll start with a question to all panelists. Since our last summit that we had in person, that was back in 2019, supply chains have come under a lot of pressure. A lot of it has been related to the pandemic, but there have also been unrelated events, such as the container ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal. And now we have the impact of the war in Ukraine. So all of these developments have disrupted supply chains. What are the lessons that we can draw from these disruptions to the supply chain? And I'll ask that question to my dear panel members, and I'll start with Luisa Uccio, who is the Director of Shipping and Trade Policy at EXA. This is the EU Ship Owners Association. So, Luisa, the question is, what are the lessons that you draw from these supply chain disruptions?
Thank you, Olaf. First of all, just to introduce EXA a little bit, we are the association that represents National Association of Ship Owners. So our members are national associations, and this means that our members are in all shipping sectors, from bulk to liners to passenger transport. And this, of course, means that the pandemic has had many, many different impacts on our industry. If we focus on the supply chains, I think the maritime industry had a realization, especially in the first few months of the pandemic, in part also compounded by the incident in Suez that Olaf mentioned, that the shipping industry works very well, and it works a little bit under the radar. Nobody really notices shipping until something goes wrong, and until a situation like the pandemic happens. We faced many different challenges, and I think here I might preempt a little bit what also Livia from the ETF might bring later on. I think for us the main issue that we faced was an issue for our crew. We really faced first of all, some safety and welfare issue for our seafarers that were stuck on board ships without being able to disembark or embark. which in turn also had an impact on the fluidity of the supply chains, because our ships had to wait in port for seafarers to embark or disembark. That added to the general delays that were, starting to compound in the supply chain. If I have to point out to one learning experience there, I think this word will come up several times in this panel, is communication and cooperation. We had with ETF, we are social partners at the European level. We have many activities towards the regulators who try to, if not solve, at least to streamline and simplify the procedure for our seafarers for their own safety and welfare, but also to keep the supply chain going. And indeed, not just at European level, obviously I'm a European association, so my interlocutors tend to be more the European Union itself, but also cooperation with and between member countries, member states. Because there we really saw the lack of harmonization of rules. So this is not specifically just for seafarers and transport workers, but in general, we saw so much different interpretation of recommendations, also for the loading and unloading of cargo, and how that cargo then moved through the supply chain. And I think if we need to draw a lesson here is for the future, try to have those channels more open and more streamlined, to make sure that if something like this happens again, or indeed if we face other uncertainties, and the war in Ukraine, as you mentioned, is really one, I think, that's impacting supply chain in Europe and beyond right now. To have those channels of communication well-oiled, I think is the main lesson learned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louisa. A lot of elements there. Communication, cooperation, also harmonization of rules. And you also mentioned, of course, the workers and crews as a main issue there. That brings me logically to our second panelist, Livia Spera. Livia is the General Secretary of the European Transport Workers Federation, also known as ETF. So she presents the transport workers. Livia, what are the lessons of the supply chain disruption from the perspective of the transport workers? And are these completely new challenges, or are they in a way also challenges that were revealed by this whole situation of the pandemic?
So first of all, good morning, everyone, and thank you to the ITF OECD for this opportunity. Indeed, the first thing I would like to say is that it's important that the workers are involved in this kind of discussions, because when we talk about supply chain, we talk about many actors, and we often forget the workers that are there to move supply chains around the world. What we said throughout the pandemics was that we had said so. Well, for us, nothing that happened during the pandemic came as a surprise. All the elements for the perfect storm were there. The pandemic happened, the Suez Canal was blocked, and then many other things, the war. So all elements piled up over the last couple of years. But all we knew, we were aware, we had warned that supply chains were extremely fragile, and that there were a lot of inconsistencies, and that there were a lot of problems, and that the system would have cracked very easily if any major or even a minor disruption would have happened. So we represent workers in all transport modes. So one of the big problems we had to face, and it is true that back then we had a good dialogue with the ship owners at global and at the European level, because we had a common interest, of course. So one of the problems we faced was exactly about the seafarers' crisis, which from our point of view, of course, it was a problem of a supplying country, but it was also a humanitarian problem. Imagine people that are blocked on ship for more than 11 months, which is the maximum. These people are already in isolation. There is already a lot of mental problems. So we have to look at it also from a human perspective. But we also have to look at it from the perspective of the people that couldn't board the ships, so they didn't have actually any income. And so we see how the whole shipping sector, Luisa talked about the fact that nobody sees the shipping sector. I think that is not by accident. We talk about sea blindness, that many actors in the shipping sector like not to be visible, like to use flags of convenience. If we would have had probably less flag of convenience, we would have had maybe flag states taking bigger responsibility. That was a big problem in the shipping crisis. So can we have the world trade relying on shipping? We are happy about it, but how much is too much? Outsourcing, so taking labor just from outside Europe, from a number of countries, from a limited number of countries, flagging out our ships. Of course, the supply chain is fragile, but of course, the supply chain disruption goes beyond shipping. We have workers in ports that were also extremely affected by this, and in all the other transport sectors, but maybe we can talk about this later more specifically.
Thank you, Olivia. Yes, certainly. I think it certainly makes sense to talk more about some of the issues that you mentioned. You said it's not a surprise. This, in a way, reveals how fragile supply chains are. And we talked, of course, about the maritime sector, and you also talked about this, the port workers. Now it's time to bring in, let's say, another sector. It's time to bring in Carlo Borghini, who is the Executive Director of Europe's Rail Joint Undertaking. This is a public-private partnerships between the European Union and the rail sector on rail research and innovation. So the same question to you as well. What are the lessons that you draw from the supply chain disruptions? And also, has this come as a surprise, or was there already a crisis in the making?
Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. A lot has been said already in the shipping, and I share completely what Livia said about the workers and the impact of the workers. For the rail system, and clearly working in a research innovation program in institutional environment like the Europe's Rail Partnership, for the rail system, effectively has been a quite interesting experience because during the crisis of the pandemic, passenger traffic almost disappeared, and the international level was much more. And it has been an opportunity for the rail freight to demonstrate the capacity to maintain the supply chain in Europe together with the road transport, integrated road transport, because clearly with one train you can transport X number of trucks to a certain extent, and address the shortage of workers, of the workforce that we had due to the pandemic situation. And also has been an opportunity to show the capacity of the rail freight when rethought the way to operate it in a manner to ensure that we maintain the supply chain, and also would be not only for products, for medicine, for that, but also to transport patients between different countries. So it's been really an opportunity to think, okay, which is really the great connection we can create. Still, we have a lot of gaps, I think, with the shipping. Is something that we need to address for the future. At the same time, I think the rail freight business at all has suffered enormously from the crisis. I would say that it came quite unexpected in the dimension that came to us. But at the same time, the Commission action taken with the definition of the green lane to eliminate national barriers between the member states in the different field of transport, rail, but also road transport, and facilitate the transfer of goods around the continent, I think has helped to prepare for the ongoing crisis. And maybe I will come back to this later on during the discussion, because effectively, I think now we have some much more flexibility and capacity to agilely react to the situation, the crisis that we have coming from Ukraine and the supply chain targeted there. We are not there, so this is, I would say, is more tactical. I think we should learn to have a strategic approach on the crisis management, and I think it should be for an integrated logistic value chain. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these perspectives, and as you pointed out, this has also been an opportunity for, at least for rail freight, to show the potential. So we talked about maritime, we talked about rail. Now it's time to talk about trucks and logistics in a wider sense. Hanan Friedman is the CEO of TruckNet, and TruckNet is a cloud-based transport optimization platform, if I have understood this well. So the past 2 years have been extremely challenging for the logistics sector. And in spite of the unexpected events caused by the pandemic, your industry has grown considerably. So what did you learn from that?
Okay, good morning to everyone. I think that in the beginning of the pandemic, we feel that the world stopped. The economy stopped and nothing happening. After 24 hours, 48 hours, we understand that we need to eat, we need to drink, and our life coming from the supply chain, the industry of the logistics and transportation. And we see that the company that was on good technology, the company that have digitization, have good optimization, this is the first company that we see that they push. They push the train. We understanding that after the pandemic, that I think that technology can be part of the solution that can support us in the next generation. If we speak about full digitization, if we speak about connected by train, ship, truck, airplane, everything has to be connected from A to Z on the supply chain world. And this is the part that we understand that we need to do that. I can tell you that in Israel, there is a day that was on the port that we see the manager of the port of Haifa stand outside of the gate and try to stop truck that go empty to full them. Because we need to make an optimization. And today, the world is still not in the optimization that we need. We have to support that situation. We have to collaborate the effort together, all the part, because if we have here someone from PTV, it's platform that give me service, and we see that from the part of the ship and the driver, everything has to be connected. All the ecosystem have to know how to work together. If the ecosystem know how to work together, I think that it can be not only about what I think from the pandemic, is about all the optimization is going to be in a better way. And I think that technology, digitization, connectivity, amount of data, and everything have to be sharing each other. And this is the best way to collaborate.
Thank you. And I take from that we need to talk about optimization of flows, and that's certainly what we are also going to do further on in this panel. So finally, we have Marcel Huschebakker, who is a research director at the PTV Group. And that is a company that develops intelligent software solutions for transport logistics, traffic planning and traffic management. And of course, I'll ask the same question to you as well. Since the beginning of the pandemic, global supply chains have been under constant force and focus and pressure. And of course, the war in Ukraine has added further problems to all that. So how have supply chains changed over these recent years? And what opportunities does this period also hold for the future direction of supply chains?
Yeah, I think I can take up what Odan said perfectly. So this is the need. So this is what is really needed in order to cope with the pandemic. I think for us as software provider, the pandemic provided a lot of new requirements. What is needed in terms of how to better, more stable, more flexible, more resilient to optimize supply chains. Because what did we experience in the end? So we did experience a lot of disruptions in the supply chain, on the supply side, but also on the demand side. So we recognized, or we experienced, a lot of products were, they were exceeding demand. So in Germany, it was toilet paper. So you recognize if you want to buy a bicycle, you cannot buy a bicycle anymore. So for the automotive industry, it was semiconductors. So they could not produce the cars anymore because semiconductors are missing. So supply chain, as we are used to it before the pandemic, as quite stable, quite fine-tuned, optimized in its way, it's not existing anymore. On the other side, you had products that were not asked anymore. And in research, I would say this is called a classical bullwhip effect. So there is let's say an impact on the demand side, and this is then going through the supply chain with increasing impact on the number of volumes that will be produced on the different stages. And so this is what we experience in the end on the demand side. On the supply side, we had the same problems. So borders were blocked in the ports. So we had heard about Haifa, we have heard about the great San Pedro congestion. I think this was over months and years due to that no customs personnel was there for clearing the ships. So the warehouses were also not equipped. The drivers in US are paid by mile, so they had no benefit or no business case anymore, paying by mile. If you have 20 kilometers or 50 miles traveled per day, however, you are waiting for hours in the port, but also on the warehouse, so there is no business case behind that. So you get into a complete disrupted system, and the question is how you get out of that. And so it seems to be, or let's say, a striking experience is this Los Angeles case to me. I think the key to solve this was going via cooperation. So all were sitting together and say, how can we solve this? There was a pool implemented of trailers so that containers could get out of that. So, and it's then, in the end, it's about this connectivity and how you, let's say, exchange among the different stakeholders in the supply chain. So this was one. On the other side, what we experienced also was the requirement to use what we called synchromodality. So it is that classical road networks. So if large shippers or large forwarding companies are offering door-to-door service on any European destination to any destination. So this is door-to-door service in a network configuration. And what we saw is that a lot of these forwarding companies are extending their networks toward intermodal, so that you can also provide door-to-door services on a network level, on an intermodal and road-based level. So I think these are the two elements that were coming from the pandemic. And to me, it is. I think we have to work. I mean, this can happen again. So, and for me, it is to work for more resilience. So, how can we cope in the future to, let's say, mitigate the impact from these disturbances? So, and let's say, a colleague of mine, it was not from me, but we had once done a research project, and we called it a kind of autopilot. It's like in the airplanes. So when you have a disruption or turbulence, and so an autopilot is much better equipped in order to cope with turbulences than human being. So you overrule often in your impact, and so this is then, let's say, a kind of describe it as a system. How you can better cope then with these kind of disturbances by means of better connected, better information provided, better let's say, algorithms in order to, let's say, mitigate then the disturbances within these supply chains.
Thank you very much, Marcel. And also there are a lot of interesting elements that I'm sure we'll get back to later on in this panel discussion. I think if you hear the different speakers, of course there are different accents, but there are also, I think, quite a lot of common issues that seems to come up. They seem to be related to the workforce, to inefficiencies in transport flows, and to intermodality, synchromodality, as was mentioned there. So I think these provide interesting topics that we can explore further in the rest of our panel, and try to dig a little bit deeper into these issues. I'd like to start with where we also started with the workforce, and start to ask you a question, Livia. We have heard about a lack of transport workers in certain domains and in certain periods. Was there indeed, or is there indeed, a lack of transport workers, or is there something else going on? Is there a lack of attractiveness, or maybe something else? What is your take on that?
What we say is that there is no shortage of workers, there is shortage of decent jobs. So if in an economic situation where many sectors are experiencing shortage, if I can choose, I would not become a truck driver because of the conditions we know, because it's a profession that has been disregarded, disrespected, downgraded over the last decades. And this is also the consequence of how we dealt with transport in general, how we left it to some multinational companies, some big multinational companies especially, to not to be accountable. This is at the end of the day the principle. It's supply chain accountability. The users should be accountable for the services that they are using. So in the labor world, we talk about due diligence, but it's a general principle that is used also in ILO and at UN level, and now we have also some forms of new legislation in Europe. But put it more simply, if we do not have decent jobs, we will not have people filling them in. It's also a lot about leaving the choice to some players to play the game. Now we see in aviation it's the same. Now that the aviation sector is picking up again, there is a shortage, especially in ground handling, in cargo as well. And this is because we have allowed companies to fire 40% of the workforce back in 2020. We knew that there was going to be a resurgence of the sector. It came a little bit earlier than expected, and now at the moment we are lacking people. We're lacking people because ground handling is under pressure because of how the airline world works and puts pressure on the service providers. When there are good jobs, there is actually no shortage. We have the example now in Italy where our unions have signed a collective bargaining agreement for the whole supply chain of Amazon, so in the warehouses and for the deliveries. And actually, they are earning much more, the people there are earning much more than truck drivers and then public transport workers. And so many people from these sectors are actually moving to Amazon, which is normally considered to be the worst employer. It's actually a very bad employer in many cases. But when we manage to set good conditions, when we engage in a dialogue, and it wasn't easy, when we engage in dialogue with the unions and when we set binding collective bargaining agreements, shared solutions, when we manage workloads, fatigue, health and safety issues, and so on, we do not have a shortage of workers or a shortage of good jobs. What happened in the UK, I think, for us as transport trade unions, these disruptions gave us a unique opportunity to show what work in transport is. Work in transport was mainly invisible, and I think we never had so many requests for interviews as in the last years, because there was a lot of curiosity, a lot of interest for these people that work behind the scenes mainly. And so what we are saying now, it's let's not go back to the previous situation. Let's work to improve those conditions. Let's work to minimize the reason for shortages of good jobs. So there could be a lot of lessons to be learned again, as we talk about lesson learned, in order to avoid this situation to happen again in the future.
Thank you. So you say there's no shortage of jobs, there's a shortage of decent jobs, and there are a lot of things you can actually do about this. Carlo, I saw you wanted to react on that.
Yeah, I think, thank you. Only to complement what Livia said, I would extend the aspect of the workers to not only to the direct transport, but also the infrastructural elements of this transport. So if you look at the full integrated logistic value chain, especially in rail, we have a full workforce involved in the infrastructure or in the airports for the aviation and so on and so on. Today, 50% in some companies, the average age of the workforce reaches 55 years old. Meaning in 10 years we lose completely the knowledge and the experience. So we need really to as I think was said also by Marcel and Anna, we need to integrate the data that we have available to anticipate the future crisis that will come. The experience in Los Angeles will replicate in Europe if we don't anticipate it properly. And what we do from the perspective of the Europe's Rail program is to try to introduce automation and digitalization inside the rail system in the logic that was mentioned before to cope with the lack of workforce. But this will not be possible if the workforce is not on board to ensure this accompanying the transition between, let's say, activity strongly dependent on the human factor to the digitalization of the same activities. And at the moment, we can see that the Great Resignation in the United States somehow is also present in Europe in different manners. And we risk that we are underestimating the long-term impact of the crisis. So we have solved the issue from the tactical point of view. We have re-established a supply chain, more or less. But at the same time, there is something going on that may question the long-term, let's say, growth of our economy if we are not anticipating this. So the attention of the workforce should be really part of this transition process that we are running, including toward the sustainable transport and mobility. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Louisa. I think you were the first one who mentioned workers and the crew change crisis that was there in maritime transport. I think your organization also has made the point that transport workers should be recognized as key workers. So I think it would be interesting to know a bit more about that. What does it mean? What would that change?
Thanks, Olaf. Maybe before we move to the point, I think we. What I will say, it goes a little bit in the same direction, but also building on what Carlo was just saying now. Starting with the definition of key worker, I think there is a need to recognize that, specifically in the context of the pandemic, the definition of key workers was crucial to ensure that people could move, is the mobility of the transport workers. And if I have to get the example of seafarers, it's not only the embarkation and disembarkation which was difficult, but it was also getting the crew into the different member states, into the port. This, of course, was an issue specifically when it came to the start of the pandemic, but also last year when we saw the vaccination campaign starting to roll out. Of course, key workers, transport key workers were exempt from having to demonstrate proof of vaccination. But then again, the fact that, for example, to give the example of Europe, when the COVID certificate was deployed, of course, a seafarer could, in theory, move around without the certificate, but he wasn't allowed to get into a restaurant or get into a supermarket because they still had to have the certificate. And this is not just for vaccination that were recognized from the European Union, but also one of the effort that was made also with the ETF was trying to push for recognition of EMA recognized vaccines, because this has an impact not just on the work in itself, but also on the mobility of the person in general. To just build on what Carlo was saying, I think when we look at the title of this session of promoting supply chain access, I think one of the words that came up earlier on was resilience. And there, I think it's very important to look at this in the longer term. We have, once again with the ETF, a project specifically to work on the skills that are needed in the seafaring sector, not for now, but for the future. And this looks at many different things, digitalisation being one. Of course, we talk, or you can hear quite a lot in the sector, the talk of autonomous shipping. We are not there yet, but the technology at various levels, being just in the engine room, is more and more digitalized. So skills are needed to manage that, both on board when you're on board, but also onshore, And this is also something that we see as an industry as a possibility to announce, for example, the transition of seafarers from, once they finish their career at sea to expand on shore. And if I can make another point, I think Carlo mentioned at the very end the sustainability. The skills are also needed for the decarbonization of the sector, because we are looking now at transitioning the shipping industry towards a decarbonized transport mode. We are not there yet. We are transitioning. The innovation and research is ongoing, but this will require skills also from obviously from our on board and onshore. So this is, I think, looking at this in the, as Carlo was saying, in the long term, working on what skills we foresee will be needed, even if, of course, when it comes to research and innovation, it's everything is still pretty much on the table. We already see the new fuels coming, at least under discussion, and this will require additional new skills.
Thank you. I think looking at the time, it's now maybe the time to make the transition to another theme that some of you brought up, which was the digitalization, and there's also a link obviously with labor, so we can talk about that as well. And I'll turn now to Hanan. I think one of the things that you have said in the past is that about 30% of the trucks all over the world run without cargo, so that there are a lot of empty miles of trucks, and there's a lot of inefficiency in the transport system. And that digitalization can actually help to solve that problem. So what are the solutions to solve these empty truck movements around the world?
Okay. Yes, we speak about 30% of the truck empty in Europe, 36% in USA, 40% in Asia. We speak about situation that 46 million of empty mile on the road all over the world every year. We speak about 37 gigaton of GHG emission that come from our industry. Is a huge number, and we need to find a way to reduce that. I think that the technology can support us in that way, and if we speak about technology, for sure we speak about the digitalisation is part of that. But I think that our problem is that industry to work in traditional way. We optimize our fleet, our work every day in traditional way. And the traditional way, the hard way to say, we work in-house fleet optimization, like you hear, in-house fleet optimization. We make it inside our corporation. Now, if we speak before about connectivity and we speak about digitalisation, it's not in-house fleet optimization. We need to share the data if we want to create a better optimization. And this is the problem. From my point of view, the first thing that we have to do is we have to digitalisation all the service from A to Z. If we speak about the eSIM, if we speak about the driver, okay, that's going to be in the truck, he has to be connected to the ecosystem. If we speak about the eCMR is the paper that go with the delivery. If we speak about the end client that have to be part of that. If we speak about the ship company have to be connected to the fleet of the transportation company. Only when you match everything together and you start to share your data, you can create the optimization that you need, even with the time that the truck wait to the ship. If we speak about the line in the port, we don't speak about that, but the line in the port is critical. And I'm very smart in what I do. I'm matchmaker between truck, empty truck, to available cargo. But I'm very smart, but if I don't have the data that PTV can provide me, what's happening in the road in the same moment, I cannot do nothing with that. If I don't have the data when the ship comes to the port, I cannot play in the game. If the driver not connect to the gate and the security issue in the port, it makes to us again problem. In the end of the day, we come back to digitization, connectivity, and for sure we need the technology that support us with the AI, BI, and machine learning. And everything together, I think, can provide us our solution to take not only the optimization, we speak about emission, is part of that, is the amount of money that go on, and then in the end of the day, we don't have driver. And this is a situation that we need to create this optimization, because what's happening, and we see that in the pandemic, that we don't have enough driver, because we don't have enough optimization, and everything is connected in the end of the day.
Thank you. Anything is connected, you need the data. So how to share the data, Marcel? Do you have some responses there?
I mean, data is a quite central element for all. I mean, Anna described it quite well. So he cannot do anything if he don't have the data. And I mean, from our side, we have let's say different kind of products. So starting with a simple routing product, I would call it, used by transport operators, by shippers, anyone who is doing logistics for routing and calculating and, let's say, determining how he can answer to a request from the shipper in order to make a transport from A to B. So this is a very basic and very simple element. However, even that is quite well feeded with data. So for example, from the pandemic side, we have included a feature which is showing the waiting time at borders. So let's say now it's over. However, we still have the Brexit. So and still we have waiting time at the Brexit border side. So it's coming not from the pandemic. So it's coming from a different kind of purpose. So and this is an integrated part of this product. So and this you can, let's say, further play. So we have, let's say, more sophisticated tools which are then optimizing on a transport order level, and we have also some real-time tools, which is called estimated time of arrival. And I would say, take this as an example for what is the difference between road and rail. So estimated time of arrival, you can easily detect, you can predict, and you can also, let's say, anticipate about, let's say, logistics processes, how you can adapt them. So it's a very simple tool, however, with a large impact on the supply chain. And let's say, comparing this to rail, so when we are talking about synchromodality and extending the networks, similar levels we have not achieved. So your basic data is not available, so you don't have a central database about intermodal services. This is not existing yet. So you don't have the planning data at all. Coming to real-time data, so something like an estimated time of arrival. So this is, this is most difficult. You have to cope with different kind of rail companies. You have, possibly you have some intermodal operators that are providing you these kind of data, however, based on information that is coming from the railway undertaking network provider. So they predict on a human level about the estimated time of arrival when a train is arriving at a terminal. So and this information is used then by a trucking company in order to, let's say, optimize these supply chains. So coming back to the previous point about synchromodality, so we need to come to integrated network, and we need that in my view, rail needs to understand that it has to, let's say, get to the level of what road is providing, and also, let's say, sees it also as one player within this, let's say, connected ecosystem, as we described it before. So it's not the railway company, it should be part of this ecosystem. So these are the two elements. And I think once we have that, so we have also, let's say, a very good basis for a business case. And this is, I think this is what drives this whole system then in the end.
Thank you. You talked about integrated networks. You also talked about the railways. Carlo, you want to respond to that?
I cannot agree more with what Marcel said, because well, I don't come from rail, my background is completely different. And when I joined Shift to Rail, the first program was launched as integrated level, European level. I never understood why it was a technological-driven program and not a logistic-driven program. And I think this is really the major difference we are running now. So now we have designed a research innovation program to address exactly what Marcel said, which are the concrete action that we need to put in place, not in 20 years. So we have a plan in the next 4 years, and there is at the moment a call for proposal open in this respect to shape the rail system in a completely different manner as part of an integrated logistic value chain. Without this, rail will never be able to become the really backbone of the European mobility and transport. My opinion is clear. There will be a decline that will be continuing because the information will be there. I think most of the information are available today. I don't think it's a problem of technology. It's a problem, as Alan said, on availability of data or making available the data. And I think if I make a reference to the experience now in the current Ukrainian crisis, you know that around 90% of the grain of Ukraine are still blocked inside the country. They cannot be exported because the ports are blocked. 75% of the grain were exported with 20% revenue for the whole country, so for 1 year, so it was quite important. And on the 12th of May, the Commission adopted a communication. And there is quite interesting because effectively, in order to, the communication is really about making the links. And it starts with the definition of the need for more vehicle, especially in order to have the volume, we need to transship from the Ukrainian gauge to the European one. We need to integrate with the matchmaking platform, exactly how we ensure that we have the correct information on train, road, and maybe storage. The definition of solidarity lanes to address the question of having the possibility to give priority of this transport and slot in the rail freight system, as well in the road system to ensure connectivity. Finally, the bottlenecks created by the customs, because we don't have the people. Today, we have an average duration of a wagon staying in a custom between 16 to 30 days. This is disrupting, by definition, the supply chain. It's not possible. It's something we need to change. We are risking to have a shortage of food in many countries around the world because we are unable to making exactly this type of links. So the experience we have, I think, taken from the pandemic, COVID, has been now starting to bring a value in how to address some of the key elements of the crisis coming from the Ukrainian situation, and most probably will help also to address how we restart the supply chain once Shanghai and the last part of China will start to be active at full speed.
I want to say something more. We are today making some pilot in Israel with Port of Haifa. And we connect in the pilot, like my system today connect to PTV system. And part of the pilot is to create a full digitation from the first client that we speak and still to the end place, that it's start from the moment that the cargo go from the factory. The data from the road I take from PTV, I provide the data to the security on the port about the truck, when it's going to come, and the port inside try to manage the situation before the truck come and how it's going. And even when we speak about the way back, that in the port now they fix like, I don't know, 100 container, okay? And just to understand, truck come, and I want the container that is down. They need to make this situation. When we speak about how to fix it, it takes a lot of time and a lot of money. Now the truck is going to wait, and if the truck waits, the line is go up. But in the situation that the port know when the truck is coming and how to fix the delivery, and they match that, and they match it. Look, it's data that come from the client, the data that come from me, from TruckNet, the data that come from PTV, and we connect this data to the government in Israel, because you have a tax to pay and you have security issue. We connect all, and we try to do that. Now the pilot is going to start 2-3 months from today. But really, one of the problem is the data. Everyone have his data. Not everyone want to share the data. And this is when we speak about traditional industry, they keep the data. And for sure, we have to take care, because we have the security data, we have the JBDR, we have to think about all. I can tell you that I tried to make the same situation with SNCF in France of the train. It was impossible. Impossible to get for them some data. And I only want to know when the train is come, to know how I match the truck, because even if you use train, you have the first mile and the last mile that have to be with truck. And we try to find a way to do that. I can tell you that with SNCF in France is very difficult. They speak about some solution in the Green Deal that coming, that they try to found. But in the end of the day, it's not about Green Deal. It's about to change the way that we think. And this is, I think, our big challenge in the industry.
Thank you. So it is, the data are there. It is about making the links, literally, between the different data. Luisa, you wanted to add something to that?
If I just can come in, this is less of a point on digitalization and more of a point on discussion. But we have also, as EXA, being involved in the communication on the EU-Ukraine solidarity lanes. And in fact, what it's interesting in that communication is that you name specifically actors at EU level, at the industry side, that can step in to provide information and assist. My organization is one of them. And what was interesting in the lead up to the publication of the communication, it was very fast. It was done really, and that shows quite a lot of commitment as well from the EU on this side. But it created a very interesting question also from my members, so the actual companies, because from the shipping side, my understanding, it's still early days, but my understanding of what they're trying to do is going from a situation where the vast majority of grain from Ukraine was shipped by ship, and of course the ports have been closed for almost 3 months now. So that's out of the question. So now we need to, as Carlo was saying, we need to bring them out of Ukraine, and then eventually also to a port, if we want to ship them further away. And this will go predominantly through Baltic ports, but also from Adriatic ports. That's at least the understanding that I was given. And this is a very interesting question from some of our operators that operate dry bulk, because they're asked, first of all, if they want to, if they would be able to assist. Most of them, of course, are able and willing. But it requires also the operator on the port to think about their logistics differently, because suddenly some of their assets are somewhere else. And how does this have an impact through their own logistics chain? So this is just, and I think what we are seeing here, it's, again, not necessarily a very digitalized way of doing things, but to bring the operators together. This is what, for this initiative, the European Commission is doing, is to bring the operators together to really match who is in that port, who will bring potentially the cargo by truck or by train, what is the capacity of the port, and then what type of vessel can, for example, access the port, because it depends, of course, on the size, etc. But what type of vessel can be there at what time, and what can they provide? Will it be just short sea shipping? Would it be deep sea shipping? It creates really a reflection, which ideally, as Anna was saying, at a certain point, if we can do this, part of this reflection, digitally, potentially with some help from AI or algorithm, just to see what is possible, and then select the possibilities. I think that will be a very interesting way of proceeding. And obviously now, we operate a little bit by crisis, but maybe if we can, quote a party, let's not waste a good crisis and see what we can do, to make the system more resilient in the future.
Yeah. So in a way, the crisis also urges all sectors to work together and try to find solutions to come up with ways out of the situation, and digitalization can help actually there. I wanted to get back to you, Livia. I think it was Carlo who made the link between digitalization and the workforce, and I think he said, well, you cannot have digitalization without the workforce. And that, of course, raises indeed the question, what is the link between the two? Are they complementary? Are they substitutes? How do you see that?
I think we have, we all agree we won't stop digitalization, we won't stop the technological progress, and I think that transport workers have always adapted throughout the years. Of course, the processes we are assisting, we are seeing now are much more, go much faster, and they are much more complex, but whenever there was involvement from the workers and from the union, Carlos said this from the very beginning, in the process, in the decision-making of the process, there was a successful story behind. If we try to impose things without involving the workers in the decisions that are around new technologies, then there is, of course, there is another disruption. Yeah? Of course, digitalization can come also with some opportunities for us. If I have to go back to what I said earlier about tracking, at the moment there are very few Europeans that want to drive a truck, certainly a long-distance truck, because the profession was so emptied, and it was so really working conditions worsened really significantly over the last 20 years. If we make this profession again a profession through digitalization, for instance, we may think about having less trucks if we develop new ways of platooning and so on, but we can have actually European or non-European working at European conditions, but really professional. So it can be an opportunity in some cases, but again, it has to be negotiated with the unions, with the workers. Another question is also the employment of women. We need more women in the transport sector. We have an average of 20% with a lot of segregation in some professions in transport and in some sectors. We need. Often it is said, well, digitalization will bring more women. This is not proved. There is some extra research that needs to be done. There is some extra effort that needs to be done because of also access to education that are more oriented toward digitalizations are still not fully accessible for women. So there is still a lot of discrimination. So also the job cuts that come with digitalization, in fact, very often affect jobs that are, in general, occupied by women. So this is a very important dimension for us that needs to be explored as well. We don't need to make the assumption more digitalization, more women in transport sector, because it's absolutely not proved, and there are a lot of doubts about it at the moment.
Thank you. So digitalization is not the magical cure for all of our problems. But of course, it can also help us bring more intermodality and synchromodality, and that was the point that you were making, Marcel, earlier. And I'd like to turn to that issue now. Maybe you could explain us a little bit how the work that you're doing on data, how that could help to increase this intermodality, and do you also have the ambition really to change the modal splits to make sure that there is less road traffic and more other modes?
Yep. Okay, from PTV side, we cannot change the modal split, so we can, let's say, support it by providing technology and tools that are helping our customers to let's say, proceed or execute a kind of model shift. And so what I would like to tell is, I mean, for me, synchromodality or intermodality or integrating intermodal transport mode into road transport or into logistics network systems is for me a kind of key driver for decarbonization. So when we are talking about what kind of impact can the transport system or the logistics system contribute to reducing CO2 emissions? I think in the end, there are possibly two or three drivers. So one is intermodality, the second one is optimization, so that you better fill, that you avoid empty mileages, and that you also, let's say, possibly change your cargo structure, so that you, when talking about, let's say, better using load space, so you can do it by weight, you can do it by volume, probably you can also mix it, so why not using it in an optimal way that you don't have air inside of the truck. So this is the second one, and the third one is electrification then for me. So, and here, probably this is a kind of more long-term effect, because electric trucks or heavy trucks are not existing yet, so some operators or some manufacturers are providing this year, possibly next year, serious production trucks. However, they will not be on a large scale. So this is, and it might take some years in order that fleets are really, let's say, replaced by electric trucks that are presently in a conventional one. So therefore, a short-term one is really intermodality, how you can achieve in the short term impact on decarbonization, the supply chain. So this is, let's say, a key driver for me. And we have, let's say, done some studies with shippers together in order to see what kind of impact can it have. And we came up with figures about 30 to 35%. So the question is, this is a kind of potential is really to materialize. So what is there in terms of capacity? And here, there is, let's say, the most question to me. So we have networks, we have classical network structures like north-south, so from Rotterdam to Genoa, which are perfect. Surprising to me was that even France has very good intermodal network access connections, however, in a different kind of technology. So they are using cargo beamer and Modalor systems, while Germany and north-south is using more horizontal transshipment technology, and also, let's say, services are emerging in Central East Europe. So, however, still the network is not there and connected as it should be. Services are lacking, so when it should be comparable. And again, business cases coming here in terms of frequency and in terms of reliability. Here, there needs to be some improvements. This would mean more traffic on the network, more on the terminal, better connected to the pre and end hall. Same story again. However, it is for me the key driver to come to a decarbonization of this logistics system.
Thank you. So you mentioned there's a huge potential, but there's a question on how it will materialize. Carlo, you have been talking a lot about the integrated system and how rail should be part of that. How could that be done? What are the things that needed to be done?
Following what Marcel has just said, in the designing of the Europe's Rail Programme of Research and Innovation, we have defined 5 priorities. And the first one is about a European traffic management layer. If you want to manage a network, we need to manage a network. So we need to set up a network that is supervised at European level. Meaning that if we know there are an obstacle in any country and that the train has to be rerouted, is to be anticipated, like it happened in the road system. The second is fundamentally automation and digitalization. So this means that we need to rely more and more on the performance of the system. What you said, we need to have more train, higher speed on the existing network, because if we build, this will be the future. Without this, we will not have a supply chain integrated. And I was on Saturday night, effectively on a demonstrator of ATO, and it was interesting because the driver was in the cabin, but was doing nothing. So was only supervising the train. Clearly, it was a demonstrator. We spent half of the night there to show that effectively you can maximize the performance of the system at the moment it is deployed. The third is that we need to change the infrastructure. We have still an infrastructure, and we have operations that are all strongly dependent on the infrastructure. So we need to use the digitalization approach to go in the direction. And on freight in particular, we have 2 major areas. One is we need to address a lot of technological issues that are still present. Wagons are still screwed together. We have still the issue of border controls that are blocking the train and so on and so on. So One is technological, the other aspect is all back to the management of information. So when Anna was saying that he has issue with SNCF, I will go asking him which is the contact points, and we'll see what he can do, because I think we can really change it. So we have designed rail research innovation activity for the next 4 years for €500 million to reach a maturity level to start deployment in the following 5 years of the decade. And these are the key priority, because without this, clearly, if rail will not play its role, I have serious doubts we'll be able to reach the targets in terms of decarbonisation and sustainability for the overall transport value chain. And we will suffer enormously with disruption on the supply chain access, because also platooning, if you think about platooning, will not reduce the congestion on the roads. Well, with the shortage of driver will be there. So we will need to address all these type of elements. Rail can be this, but in order to be rail capable to match this type of expectation, connecting road, last mile, shipping, and so on, we need to go on and accelerate the transformation we started.
So a lot of different elements are needed, actually a whole package of things to promote intermodality. Han, you want to add something?
When I hear all the members here in the panel, I understand that we are starting the revolution in the industry. This is the beginning of the revolution in the industry, because we are, let's say that, oh, we need some revolution. And I think that when we sit here and I hear the guy from the rail, sorry that I say that, from the ship, driver, I understanding that we are part of the beginning of that revolution to share, and in the end of the day, it's going to be like open API for everything and data, and just we need to connect ourselves to the data, and when we can make it. I think that we're in a good way from my side when I listen, because in the first time that I sit in the COP26 that was in Paris in 2016, everybody speak about the option to share, but they not was sure that it can happening. Today we see that we have a people that try to make it every day. It means that we are going on for the target, and I'm happy for that, from my side.
Good, thank you. I think we have some time to ask you, the audience, for questions. Is there anything you'd like to ask one or more of the panelists? So this would be the moment and the opportunity. So who wants to ask? Who wants to go first? Who has a burning question? There is a question there, and I think we will need a microphone. And please introduce yourself first so that we know who you are.
Oh, hello, my name is Simon from Australia. And I was really hoping for all of the panel to comment on the role of security in the security incidents, particularly with cargo and freight security, which is causing disruptions in the supply chain. What was your view on that issue, and do you have any research or considerations which might help address the issue of freight security? Thank you.
So there's a question on the security of freight. Do we have any other questions that I think we'll take some of the questions first and then we'll get the answers. No other questions for the moment? Well, you can also think about it whilst we ask the panel to react to that question on freight security. Well, we'll start with you, Marcel. Do you have a view on that?
I mean, freight security, I understand, is a kind of, let's say, attacks of terrorists and how to cope with that. So is this correctly understood? Okay, good. I mean, in the end, it's same as pandemic in my view. So you can compare it with this one. This is an unexpected disruption of the supply chain. So, and I think the mechanisms that we discussed are exactly the same that can also react to that one. In the end, it's about, okay, we have already had this in the past for 20 years. So after the 9/11 event in New York, a lot of security measures were introduced, starting from the sealing of the containers, from the X-raying of containers, and all these kind of things. So in the end, it took more time, it took a lot of more effort. However, supply chain anticipated, or let's say integrated these kind of measures and came up with a kind of, let's say, stable organization again. So this is, in my view, it's comparable to what pandemic was causing and how you can cope with it. So this is a quite, let's say, comparable issue then for me.
So yes, if we speak about security, I come from Israel. I can tell you that digitation and automation for sure is full security, and I tell you why. Because when you go to the part of digitation and automation, it means that you create visibility on the way. When you create the visibility, we create the monitor. If you have digitation with the driver, we speak about the hour of the drive. If we speak about the monitor and the visibility, we speak about a safe parking on the way. It's part of the way where you are parking, it's the same. Now, if we speak about ecosystem, that everything is connected, you get full visibility from up. And to get the perfect security, you have to be with full visibility. And I think that all what we speak now about digitation and connectivity and the GPS location from PTV, and all that data together give you full security that you don't have even today in a full way. Because today, part of the way that we have with a truck on the supply chain, you have a part that it's like a black box. No one knows what's happening with the driver in that point. But if you connect everything, then you can get the full visibility in 100% can provide you full security.
This is a very interesting question, because for me, what I would ask after that, okay, you have full visibility, and how you make sure that that system is secure. Because the reason why I'm asking is because when it comes to shipping, first of all, this is not necessarily about security of freight, but security of our operations. And this is a topic, of course. Maritime security is a much broader meaning. But if we speak specifically about cybersecurity, this is something that the sector and our companies are really looking into. What we've been seeing for the last few years is predominantly, when it comes to, for example, cyber attacks, is attacks on land. So is attack at company level. It's not attacks at ship level yet. That is it's a complicated situation, which we really also need to manage, and this is where also the training, where we're referring to earlier on, comes in, because it's a very, potentially a very disruptive situation and dangerous situation. And what we're looking at least from the side of EXA at policy level, is really at this stage raising awareness and best practices within the industry. This is also something that is going on at international level, International Maritime Organization. Of course, they're preparing guidelines on cybersecurity. But really to raise awareness of what the risks are and how to plug them. And the reason why I'm interested is in the moment where, of course, we are going through this process, and at the same time saying, of course, we need to share more and more data, we need to open up the system, we need to have full visibility. How do you bring together, sorry, I'm asking the question from the audience now, but how do you bring the two together?
I tell you. You know, if we look about the war that was 40 years ago, it was with tank, it was with soldier. If you take the war today, it's come from the side of the computer. For sure, when we create a new security, about what he asked me, I look about the road, I look about the parking, I look about the delivery. In the moment that we create the new generation of our ecosystem, we need to fight from the side of the cyber. And we understand that. But I think that today the technology supports us to do that in a full way. For sure, company have to be connected to the ISO, you know, and all what you need. But when you start to manage amount of data, you have to be prepared for that. But anyway, if you ask me, it's better that we take the fight from our side only about the cyber and not all the process from A to Z. And this is an easy way to you to put the effort from your side only for the cyber. Because if you take now this situation out, you have a lot of open place for security that you can on the way. And I think that for us, it's better that we match that only for the data and we save the other. That's what I see.
Thank you. So I think we're coming close to the end of our session. What I'd like to do is ask all 5 panelists actually one last question. We've heard a lot of people talk about resilience, and this is a word that came up a lot. I have a question on resilience and the resilience of supply chains. Do you think supply chains are resilient enough? And if not, how to make them more resilient? And is there actually a trade-off between resilience and other things? For example, are resilient supply chains going to be more expensive, or are there ways to do this as a win-win? A difficult question to end with, but I think it would be interesting to have your views on the resilience of supply chains and what would be needed, but also what would it cost. And if I can start maybe from that side, Marcel, and then we go.
I think the ingredients for a resilient system, so we discussed, I think that the key is connectivity. So if I have the data, if I have the information, I think this is, for me, is the basic need in order to put anything on top. So, and as I said, so we have, if we could come up with a kind of orchestration and how to, let's say, bring back a disturbed supply chain into a normal state. So if we have mechanisms, so this could be we heard artificial machine learning, all these words about, let's say, future technologies that could help in that. And I think that there's a vast field for exactly these kind of new developments. So this could be very helpful. In my view, it is all about, let's say, starting from connectivity, and connectivity is always ecosystem is always cooperation. So these are the starting points how I would see it to define a resilient system.
From my side, I think, first of all, I will agree to that. I think connectivity is the key. But if I can make another point, and this is less maybe of a practical point and more of a general point, from a European perspective, what we're seeing is that a resilient supply chain in the near future will need to be a decarbonized supply chain, a sustainable supply chain. And I think here we have many modes, which are all in various stages of transitioning towards that goal. We are seeing, at least from the maritime perspective, but I think this is generally when it comes to transport, that the EU is taking a role whereby they are raising the standards for environmental compliance. And if you want access to the market from the outside, and this is specifically a point that for shipping is very important because we are a global industry, if you want to come into the market, you need to raise the standards, you need to comply with higher standards, and you need to decarbonize. This is something that, of course, for a global industry is difficult, but it's something that we are, at European level, very committed to do. But this is also something that, in our view, will also potentially change the patterns. It will change the trade patterns potentially, and this will also change potentially the way logistics work. So when I think resilient is something that foresees as much as possible the uncertainty that we see in the world, foresees the regulatory developments, adapts to the regulatory developments, and at the end of all of this also comes out as sustainable as possible.
I think we are, the supply chain, generally speaking, we are resilient up to the next crisis. Unfortunately, this is what we have experienced. But at the same time, I think what we have been able to show is that, as you said, in 24 hours we thought everything was finished, but the day after we woke up, we think, okay, how we address it? And I think this is actually what also Marcel said before about the idea to create the autopilot. So which are the elements we need to set up to be able to transform the signal that we can detect and anticipate to keep the system resilient? And I think because the crisis will come in a different manner, in different dependencies, in different type of nature, if we want to keep a sustainable transport and mobility system that will be resilient to different crises, we simply should move maybe to the concept of the focus on the cost and the margins to what is the life cycle cost, what is the long-term benefit of this. Clearly, data will help, the management of data. I don't know sharing data, but for sure management of data. Realizing how much value we are losing because we don't manage data every single day. We are looking at the fact that how much we can lose if we share the data, but we don't think about how much we are losing every day, the famous empty trucks or empty trains going around. So all these elements will be, but fundamentally we will need to move from in my opinion, from really this tactical approach of solving the crisis to go for setting up the elements that will be able to take action on signal coming from the system. I think energy crisis, climate crisis, all these type of elements have been here for years. But we have always, let's say, I think you said before, we are, especially for the supply chain, we are under the radar. No, we work under the radar. Everything is going fine. Nobody is concerned about it. But when the crisis came, it is unmanageable. So I think this is really where something has to be changed to move from crisis management to how we anticipate it. Thank you.
I can tell you that I'm optimist. I tell you why, because I see that in crisis we are good. And we can see that what's happening in the pandemic, and everybody was part, we see it with Ukraine. I think that in crisis we are good. We have the data and we have the knowledge how to do that. If you ask me, now we need to create a stepping stone, and we are on that stepping stone. It means that the revolution is ongoing. We understand what we need to do. Now there is stepping stone on the way to get the target, to come to the goal, and I think that we are on the way. And it's about all what we say, connectivity, data, ecosystem, all the big words that we hear in the last hour. This is the stepping stone that we create to go to that moment.
I think we could spend the next day talking about this, but I think there are 2 or 3 dimensions that I would like to highlight. First, from a worker's perspective, again, I don't want to sound repetitive, but workers will contribute to make supply chain resilient as long as they have good working conditions, as long as they are involved in the decision making, as long as they are properly represented, they have good collective bargaining. I think there's no rocket science. If we take the example of some well-functioning ports in Europe, if we take the port of Antwerp, for instance, it's a port that dealt very well with the crisis, with several crises. It went through the 2008 crisis without having to fire people because of the mutual system they have among the employers of sharing the workforce. They ended after the crisis with a workforce that was still there, trained, so they didn't have to rehire and retrain. So a system that is normally, let's say, labeled as very costly was less costly in the end to overcome a crisis. I'm just giving an example of the port of Antwerp, but ports in general have been quite good in dealing with this, and in general, port workers benefit from good working conditions, could gain good working conditions better than in other transport sectors. So if we invest in it, if workers are paid the decent a share of the profits, then I think the whole transport system will be more resilient. Luisa mentioned the need of looking, when you talk about resilience, to look at sustainability. I think we need to go one step further, and we need to link social sustainability to environmental sustainability. The reason why in some segments of transport are not sustainable and there's no push to make them more environmentally sustainable is because they are very cheap, because of the cheap labor force, because of the fact that costs are kept artificially low through cheap labor force. So that's another important point that we need to make. And then finally, it was also mentioned by some of the colleagues, it's about regulation, is about governance. If we leave supply chains being ungoverned, if we leave 2 or 3 or 4 big actors buying ports, trains, integrating everything vertically, horizontally, they will de facto replace the national and international regulatory bodies. So they will do whatever they want. Is this resilient? Is this in the interest of everyone? I'm not sure. So I think this is something, it's a growing trend, and I think this is something we also need to look at in order to make transport and supply chains resilient for the future.
Thank you. So it is 12:31. I think we have come to the end of this panel session. We started with asking ourselves the question, how to improve supply chain access. We have heard several answers. We talked about resolving labor bottlenecks, improving efficiencies within transport modes so that there is more capacity available, digital solutions, creating better links between transport modes, creating a wider set of choices, and a lot of you, of course, mentioned cooperation, integrated systems, orchestration, so a lot of different words, I think, for what essentially is making the links that we promised at the outset of this session. So I'd like to thank the audience, and I'd asked the audience also to join me in a big round of applause for our 5 excellent expert speakers that I think did an excellent job in discussing about these issues, and I thank you very much for that. So thanks so much, and I think it is now time for lunch, and hopefully see you at other sessions. Thank you.